Afternoon, Mike.
Good afternoon, Peter.
Um, one of the areas that we touched on in some of the chats that we've had, but you really would like to expand on, I gather, is the all the work that you did abroad, because we've looked a lot at the work that you've done in this country, and we've had a whole section about Israel. But I remember at one point you said something about working in Mongolia, and there's all these places that you've worked in apart from Britain. So um, I don't really know how to start on this. Maybe you can sort of get us going on that.
Well, I've, what's been initially revelatory, but now looking back on it is rather obvious, is that actors are a microcosm of their own culture.
Mm.
So when you go and work with a group of actors in another country, you discover what the country's like to quite a deep degree. It really is interesting because, again, I'm saying that when you work in a rehearsal room, you're working with a certain degree of intensity and urgency, and therefore all the traits and sort of abilities and disabilities of the people concerned come to the fore very strongly. And and the other thing that was really useful was to learn never assume. So my first work abroad was in Israel. I mean, I'd worked in America, obviously, because that's where I trained, and then came back to England. And of course, they are very, very different. But I sort of went to Israel assuming that the stage management, the assistant directors, the rehearsal times, the way the technical rehearsals were organized would be exactly the way we do them here. And of course, they weren't. And so I got a few very, nasty shocks and surprises to discover that the person who'd been my stage manager all the way through rehearsal was not going to be running the show. That was in Germany. Somebody who you think would be well qualified to run the show wasn't going to do it. So that was very thrilling. And so forth, and the number of rehearsals and the regulations around dress rehearsals and how many you could do and so forth. And so I had to very quickly make sure that I checked how things were run. So that was a very good education. And again, it tied up to my way of working was never assume because something worked perfectly the time before, it's going to work exactly the same again.
Mm.
So that was something. But what was fascinating was discovering, the culture through the people. So I went to Israel, and I've talked about them quite a lot. And what was very special about the Israelis, which is a repetition, is that they were very animated, full of energy, full of temperament, um, rather undisciplined, rather spoiled because it's a lot of big energy and a lot of big fish in a very small pool. And at the time I worked, people got successful very quickly, and became sort of gods, sort of holy cows very quickly, and could do almost anything they wanted to. So it was quite difficult to sort of control them. You, you, and I and what was a good learning thing for me when I was in Israel, I learned to swear and to shout at actors, not a practice I admire, because you tell them to do something, we're going to rehearse, 6 days a week. Oh, wonderful, Michael. And they are wonderful, wonderful. And then they come up to say, oh, Michael, please, I have a television special I could do, or I've got a solo show tonight. Please let me off. And I would say, but I told you when we started working that I would be working you all and need you all for 6 weeks. That's why I told you. No, but please, Michael, just this once. And this would go on. They'd sort of flirt and coax, and be coy and use whatever, techniques they felt would work on me. And, so finally it got to the point where I said, no, shut up, go away, fuck off. No. you know, and I thought, oh, what am I saying? You know, if you said that to an actor in England, even 20 years ago, you would have been, you know, roundly accused of bad behavior and so forth. But they took it, you see. It's very so wonderful. They can have rows, and 2 minutes later, it's all forgotten. You know, so it's rather healthy. I remember seeing a couple of cab drivers, I think they were, on one of the main streets in Tel Aviv, and they were having an argument, and you thought knives or guns are going to be produced any minute. And 5 minutes later, they were walking off arm in arm. And the other thing with Israelis, you have to be very careful about saying, look, I want us all to share in this, and I want everybody to contribute and give your opinions and so forth. To ask an Israeli to give their opinion, you, if you've got 10 actors and a stage manager and whoever is there, you've got 15 experts who tell you what they think and argue with each other. So I had to modify my way of, you know, allowing them to collaborate. And eventually I found my way through it, and they were wonderful. I mean, the thing about the Israelis, they have lots and lots of energy. It's slightly nervous energy at times, I think, and anxiety energy, again, which I didn't realize at a time, because when I first went there, it was sort of what's 60, no, what was it, 59? It was not that long after the 6 Day War, and they were all heroes, and everything was wonderful. And they, so I thought the country was at peace. I thought, you know, they behaved as though they were just ordinary, you know, and just another country going about their business. But of course, always at the back of their minds and in their guts somewhere is the danger of threat. And there were always explosions and bombs and terrorist activities and things going on, and little skirmishes and excursions on the border, you know, which became a daily routine. And I didn't sort of register them very much. And it's only after being there for about 3 years, I suddenly realized that there's a huge amount of anxiety inside them. One of the things I noticed, which was very interesting, and of course I don't know if it's the same now because that culture changes so rapidly. You can watch it shifting all the time, is that if you got them to do physical work and just lie on the floor on a rest position, they were like beetles or cockroaches that had been turned upside down. They wriggled and writhed. They could not lie still. And it all came into focus for me when an actor received their little notice that they get every year to go and do 6 weeks reserve training in the military, you know. And I could see as soon as he got it, he became very agitated,
Yeah,
and couldn't concentrate. And then he'd go off for 6 weeks. And when he came back, it took him a time to run down. And of course, I thought, Michael, how stupid, how imperceptive of you not to realize that though they're at peace, they're at war. And this double reality is going on inside them and makes them often appear very unconcentrated. Because another thing I noticed, I would talk to them, and after about 3 minutes, the eyes would wander and they'd look at their clocks, and I thought they're being rude, but no, it was just a sense of anxiety. And, you know, and most actors came to rehearsal via the doctor. I'm sorry I'm late, I was at the doctor's. And I won't do the warm up today. You know, whatever it was, you see. Or they had lawsuits going on. So they were always, you know, this distraction. And of course, a lot of that was an neurotic, you know, obsession, shall we say. And so, but they had lots of energy. So they were wonderful when you got them up on their feet and got them moving. They were brilliant. They were funny. They're the best improvisers in the world. They're full of energy, attack, wit, you know, guts, just terrific. And so I used to have a wonderful time just saying, okay, do this for me. And they'd all rush off and do things. And it was a real pleasure, you see. Less good when they had to sit down and analyze a play, because then it all became very heavy and introspective and didn't yield many results. So luckily, the shows I tended to do were quite physical, and I was using a lot of physical techniques then and exercises. So I found a way of working with them. And the other thing is that because they're using so much energy, you get 2 hours of woo, and then the rest of the day you're scraping them off the floor, you know. So I had to adjust and to get, the most out of them, because they are actually very, very talented.
Wouldn't it be interesting, Mike? Wouldn't it be interesting for you to get over there now and have another session and then hear what whether those observations that you're making now, which I hasten to add, you've kind of, you've looked at to a certain extent before, but, whether they still hold.
Yes.
And
Well, the last time I worked there was in 2001, which is quite a long time ago. And the actors were more disciplined then. I found they were calmer. I don't know why, but that was just for one show. So it's difficult to tell. And that was a very nice process because it was long and it was a lot of storytelling. I did the Isaac Bashevis Singer piece with them. And no, it wasn't so frenetic. Mind you, they were pretty much it was a pretty much younger company. When I was working earlier, I had all ages, and I had some very starry names in the earlier productions who were wonderful, but they were handfuls, But so that was a real introduction and a realization for me. And then I worked in Germany, and the first time I worked in Germany, it was very interesting because it was just when the wall had come down, not long afterwards. And there were a lot of East German actors who'd moved. It was in Heidelberg, and they'd moved to the West. And I didn't think anything about it. And they had very long rehearsals, and I was going to do a very elaborate Arabian Nights story, one I'd never done before, it's the longest story in the Arabian Nights. It goes on for hundreds of pages. And it was eventually a 4-hour project, 2 parts. But I had months and months and then a break in the summer, and then we came back and put it together. And what they'd given me, which, was wonderful, I had about 15 actors and 10 dancers. It was the Stadttheater, and they had a very, very good dance company attached to them, run by a man who was actually quite famous, still is, and I'm afraid his name I've totally forgotten. He was, not quite up to Pina Bausch, but he was sort of on that level. And so it was all very exciting. I thought, oh, it's going to be wonderful. Well, it was a nightmare because the dancers couldn't work to the actors' rhythm and structure. Because they couldn't sit for any long time to discuss anything. Do you know what I mean? They had to be up and moving, which is sort of understandable. Also, they started to make demands, which I conceded to. We want to have a class every day at such and such a time. And I said, okay. And we can't work so long. And I said, okay. But every time I conceded something, they asked for something else. And so finally, I said to the intendant, I can't work with a dance company, I'm sorry. So I lost 15 bodies right there and then. Now, when I did work with them alone, they were wonderful because they could translate ideas into their bodies, and that was fabulous. So for me, it was quite a loss, but the 2 groups together just didn't combine, And I suppose it's my fault because it never occurred to me to think it through thoroughly before I went, And then now with the rest of the actors, they are very quite conservative. Actually, I lied to you. It's the second show I did in Germany where the wall had come down. This was before. So I was working with people who were under contract, I think, for three years, I think it was, to the company. And they were all ages, and they all were sort of, they were a bit like old-fashioned rep actors. They, I starred in Southampton a little bit. I was a leading actor in Bromley or something like, a little bit. I exaggerate. But they all almost exclusively balked against my work. We can't, improvising. And one by one, they dropped away. They kept going. And I think I ended up with 10 actors. Having started with 25 to 30 bodies, I ended up with 10, which was fortuitous as it happened. And all sorts of interesting things happened. There was an actress who was very good, but she was one of those people, she had long hair and was always hiding her face, and she wore sacks. She was actually a very attractive woman. And I was doing the Arabian Nights, where the characters talk about themselves, and she was one of those Oriental princesses said she was the most beautiful woman on earth. At night the moon envied her power and her beauty, and the day, blah 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 blah, and so forth and so on. You see, and I was working with her alone. She said, I can't say all this. I just feel awful saying it. I said, but it's not you. You're an actress. You're embodying that, and it's wonderful. Enjoy the pleasure of it. And she said, oh, but I came into the theatre to hide. And I said to her, well, you might have had a slightly better job if you'd gone to work in a library. I mean, I can't think of a place where you're less hidden. You're on stage, being observed totally by everybody around, you see. And wouldn't you know it, about 5 days later, she broke her leg. And I'm sure it was
Psychosomatics.
absolutely, or something. I mean, it was just so extraordinary. And it sort of went on like this. And a lot of the actors weren't very bright either, and so I worked with them, and it was frustrating, and I'd been there forever. And one day, one of the actors suddenly got very angry and said to me, oh, you English people who come over here and think you know everything better than we do, and blah, 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 blah. And we're sick of being told by you and you talking down to us. And he was very aggressive. And the next day, everything was wonderful. It was extraordinary. And why it was wonderful was quite by instinct and not by any judgment at all. When they came in the next day, and there was a sort of atmosphere, one of my exercises is towards the end of rehearsals is to get people to all run in the space in any way they want to go, playing the text very fast, but making contact with each other. And then I add to it, like picking up furniture, handing props to each other, taking clothes off, so they get very fluent with the text and it's not a problem. So I got them going and they had a wonderful time. They were very good. They even became inventive. They were wonderful. They were doing surprising things for each other. And then that seemed to purge it. And from then on, the rest of rehearsals were wonderful. And it's one of those miraculous moments when you think, was that just fate, or was it some inner judgment of mine? I don't know. Very interesting. Anyway, so there we are. And I went back to Germany quite a few years later. This was in 2000. That's right, after the wall had come down, and a lot of Eastern Germans had come, and they were very used to being told what to do. They lived in a very structured thing, and they weren't the brightest group of people. And they were mainly men. And there was a very talented, energetic, hyper-energetic actor who I'd been warned about by somebody else, who was a bit of a handful. And he had one of the leads, and the other leads, this was during the Gogol marriage, and the other lead guy had a problem with drink, and they were quite close buddies. And this high-wired guy obviously decided to challenge me. So every time I set up an improvisation, he'd smirk and he'd mutter something to all the East Berliners, and they'd all snigger and they were very, it was very unpleasant. And I knew enough German to catch on to things, but it was unpleasant. Now there were three women in the cast, and they were serious, and they wanted to work. And this huge misogyny sort of erupted. The men saying, "Oh, you stupid cows, you stupid." The whole thing was deeply, deeply unpleasant.
Mhm.
And this manic guy was manic, but he was very talented. And I said to him, "You can throw furniture around, great, because that's right, very heightened and have a go." And he liked that. And he started throwing all the furniture store around and breaking and destroying lots of rather good furniture. Anyway, on we went with this. And the other guy was getting drunker and drunker. And I used to hate going into rehearsals. Can you imagine? Didn't know where, this is not long ago. This is quite advanced in my career. And finally, I had a row with him. I actually said, "Stop this, you're behaving disgustingly, blah, 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 blah." And I really went for him. And he started crying. And I thought, right, this is going to go two ways. Either he's going to come back calm and reasonable, or something negative is going to happen. Well, unfortunately, it was the latter. He came back saying, "Just tell me what to do. Just tell me what to do. Yeah, I'll do it. Yeah, I'll do it." And I thought that's even worse than him being manic. So I said to the intendant, "I cannot work with him. I've got to replace him." And then one of the actors who'd survived the original Arabian Nights cast was around, came back, and he changed the atmosphere totally, because the Eastern Berliners had been totally subjugated by this mad guy. And when he wasn't there, they were lovely. He'd sort of bullied them into this. And the guy who had alcoholic problems was very talented. But I don't know if it was the alcohol, but he sort of, he was rubber bodied. He could bounce. I mean, you could ask him to do physical things that would hurt other people, and he was absolutely fine, flop and fall around. So it ended up being all right. But both those shows were quite difficult, because you were dealing with things that, you simply don't come across, certainly to that degree, in England, And then I worked in China, which was, the main thing there was trying to, I never felt I'd been in a more alien, different place. Not alien negative, but totally unrecognizable. Even when the actors are very charming, very polite, when they did their warm-ups, they did things that were totally unrecognizable. They did a lot of stuff walking backwards, and things like that. And I sort of watch and think, who are these people? What are they doing, you see? And they were very polite, and they listened and they nodded. And I kept saying to them, "Look, if something isn't clear, please ask me. And if you're not happy with something, please say. I won't mind." "Oh, yes, yes," they'd say. And I say, "Is everything okay?" "Yes," they'd say, and burst out laughing out of shy.
Okay.
Because there's a very hierarchical structure there, and you obey the director, and you don't want to do anything that will cause the director to lose face. So I had to work my way around that, saying, "Look, I appreciate this. You can say anything you want to me. If it's fair to say, I'm with you. You won't offend me. I want you to be happy and enjoy working." And it sort of started to ease. And then one day, one of the actors, I was doing Streetcar, and the actor playing Mitch said to me, "What am I thinking about, and what am I feeling when I come into the room?" And I almost burst into tears, because I thought, that's what any actor all around the world will say, because that's when you get rid of all the cultural differences and blah, 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 that's the essence of it. And I had this wonderful feeling of jubilation that I was working in a profession which could link people together. I really had sense that this, when you cut through everything. Theatre is about human beings, and all human beings at some level are concerned about the same things, and the theatre can sort of manifest that. So that became a very wonderful experience, and they were good, and it was a nice production, and had a lovely designer, and these people hardly worked, you know. And he talked to me about design in a way that designers don't do now. It was very skillful and full of deep knowledge. He'd say, look, if I do the thing like this with this curve, it'll repeat itself and then you'll get, and it was lovely.
Mm.
Rather, I feel, it was, I learned a lot from him, and a very good lighting designer who did what he could with whatever there was there. And at that point, the theatres were very, very poor. It was not, it was the late 80s. And, it was about 10 years since they'd come out of the Cultural Revolution and was starting to unthaw. And Arthur Miller had been there and directed Death of a Salesman for the Beijing, main Beijing theatre, had written a very good book. And you could see how they were still trapped into certain things. So when I got to them, they were very nice, but they didn't have much money to do things. And the woman who did the costumes, she brought me pages and pages and pages of design. She'd gone through every fashion book she could find and just drawn all those images for me to say that one, that one, that one. They were extraordinary. And I wanted a 1940s American refrigerator. You won't find that in China. They made one out of wood that looked so authentic. It was they were wonderful copiers, and that's their talent now. Brilliant, and resourceful and hardworking. So you see, so in all sorts of ways, these trips have been wonderful education. I was in Mongolia for 2 weeks, doing a Laban course and then doing some scene work with them, and with a lot of these companies. No, not with the Chinese, but with they were very late coming to rehearsals. People weren't good on time, and I had to sort of find my way around that without upsetting people and so forth. But they were very lovely and terribly generous and hospitable, and I was surprised how much they could pick up of sort of Western stuff. But then I realized, of course, the Russians had been in Mongolia.
Mm-hmm.
And they'd sort of built theatres there, and then had just left abruptly and left everything in disarray when they went. And so the theatres were very broken down. There was really no theatre, actually. Um, some years afterwards, the country started to become rich because they found some mineral. I can't remember what it was now. They suddenly found a lot of very valuable minerals, but it was a poor country. And again, it's interesting with the poor people. The hospitality is amazing. It was the same in China. Those actors can't have been earning much, but they invited me to their rooms where the family lived, and they'd cook these fantastic meals in the hall outside. Just so generous, and so it's a wonderful opening. And then I worked in Canada. I worked. And at this time, maybe this has changed. I worked there 3 times. They have a very low self-esteem as a nation, because at least they did at that time, because they don't know who they are. They're not English anymore. They're not American. Some of them are very determinedly French, but and they hadn't really found a clear identity for themselves. And you see, this is very interesting. This sort of psyche of the nation does dig in deeply into everybody, and the same thing happened in Germany. There's this sort of, I said, look, you have so many wonderful theaters. I mean, every big town in Germany has a wonderful theater, very well subsidized and so forth. Why aren't there better actors? And he said, sort of negative feelings about ourselves, from the Nazi period,
Mm.
a lack of confidence, which was interesting, yeah,
Yeah.
which is probably past by now. Again, you see, I think these things are fluctuating, but that was, and so, that was very strong in Canada, so people were very enthusiastic, lovely, but when things didn't start to work, they sort of became a bit, oh, I'm so sorry, and a bit tearful and a bit apologetic, and they, one got through it all right, but there was that sense of,
Mm.
oh, I've let you down, I'm not very good. So
Mm.
when I went to Australia, expecting more of the same, it was the opposite. Totally confident, fuck off to the Brits. They were great. Very direct with you, told you what they thought, and got on with the work, and very talented. And so I had a lovely time with them. So, I mean, yes, really education, but all these things I'm saying about these countries, you may not be precise now because times change and things change and so forth and so on. But it is one of the bonuses of working abroad. If you keep your eye out and you don't get locked into your work to the exclusion of anything else, it's a huge learning capacity. And as I say, the wonderful thing that came out of all these travels for me was the sense that theatre transcends borders, even with the language problems.
Mm.
It transcends borders, and that made me feel very wonderful about working in the theatre. So,
Okay, I'm just going to ask you one more question because I think we're almost at the end here. But I am struggling with the notion that the Chinese did a Tennessee Williams,
yeah,
a cat on a no,
a streetcar.
a streetcar, and they did it as an American play.
Yeah,
You set it in the 40s.
yes,
You
absolutely.
gave them American costumes of
Yes,
clothes.
yes.
So, how did they embody
Well, the interesting,
voices and the
well,
physicality?
what was very interesting about the physicality, I said to them on the first day, show me Americans. And they immediately went into their hips because they watch movies.
Right.
So that culture, they immediately shifted in a very nice way because there's a very interesting sort of, it's rather simplistic, but I don't know if I can demonstrate for you, but Brits are up here, the Americans are in the hips, and the Oriental, Eastern people are sort of crouching more. They're more, rooted in the earth and stockier. Really, really quite interesting. No, they did it. But yes, I have to tell you, this is very funny about the Chinese. They showed me pictures of productions they'd done, and they did quite a lot of European plays, and they stuck noses on. They had artificial noses, which looked terrible and ridiculous. And they were all busy going to do this. And I said, no, I do not want any wigs. I don't want any noses. I just want you embodying. And that was fine. So, but it really was, an interesting thing.
And was there any sense of of an American accent in the Chinese
I
that they were
don't think
speaking?
so. I don't think I even asked for that. I
Okay.
mean, my ears were practically falling off trying to figure out where we were in the text. That's another amazing thing, that although the language is in every way different, you could sort of tell where somebody was within a speech. And I found that in Israel too, even the first time I worked there. Totally different language, no connection with the romantic, European languages. And yet, because of the actor, you can sort of tell where they are. So that was rather reassuring.
Mm.
No, but I didn't even get into the ideas of accents then because I thought that God knows what that will do. And I can't judge it.
Yeah.
But I had this wonderful, wonderful man who was, both times I went to China, he was my interpreter. And he was one of the main teachers at the Beijing Drama Academy, or whatever it's called. And he was the loveliest, warmest, wise man. And we looked at an existing translation of Streetcar in Chinese, and it was twice as long because everything was explained. You know, not only what Tennessee Williams had written, but then explaining what it meant, you see. So he, bless his heart, stayed up every night working with me on it and rewriting it. So it was very much trimmed down. And so you had more the energy and the shape of scenes and so forth, and the rhythm. He was very good. He was a lovely man. And he also sort of whispered in my ear when I when I got a bit impatient, because the powers of the theatre were a bit grand. The man who ran the company looked like, oh God, who was with a very handsome man who was with Mao Zedong. He was the prime minister, I think. Oh God,
Showing Lao?
what? No, I can't remember. No, but he was very famous now. But he was a very good-looking man, and he looked like him. He'd done some sort of biographical film of this kind, and he's very. And if ever I started to criticize, he'd nudge me and say, "I'll deal with it. Don't." You know, because I was going to blurt out something that would offend somebody, you know, make them lose face. So, you know, one learned. Anyway, those are my travels, and there were more, but they're the main ones. And, you know, yeah, I mean, one could go on and on about them, but they're very rich. And I'm a richer person for having had that wonderful opportunity.
Excellent. All right, Mike, we're going to bring this this chat to a close. Thank you very much, and hopefully we'll meet again. Thank you. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed that that chat. And if you did, would you press the like button and also the subscribe button? That would be great. And if you wanted to be given alerts to when the next one is happening, just press the bell button. If you want to put any comments or any questions underneath here, underneath the video, please do. And at some point I will re-interview Mike, as it were, and put some of these questions to him. So I look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you.